Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hassan, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth, back once again with my boy AJ Ponciano. AJ, how are you doing here today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Doing great as well. The Saints won, which probably was a welcome sight for you after it feels like probably what, like a month and a half, 2 months?
7 games. So, it's been a while.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a while since you guys won, so good to see there. And also, we had a blockbuster trade in our Dynasty league.
Yep.
Did you end up using those guys this week, or was that just to hold on to?
So I'm starting two because T Law was out, with that shoulder injury, and
Oh,
then
that's right. Yeah.
I didn't start Hawkinson. I was thinking about it, over Juwan, but Juwan had a good game. But Brian Thomas only had like 2 catches because Mac Jones was at quarterback.
Yeah. Don't get me started about Brian Thomas. I've used Brian Thomas, it feels like, I mean, sparingly, but like, he obviously, like, it just is always how it works in fantasy, at least for me. Like, every time I start him, he does nothing. Every time I don't start him, he, like, scores 50 points. But the worst part about it was this week in two of my leagues, I needed to start Brian Thomas because I didn't have another option. And he definitely let me down and disappointed me. But for those that didn't know, in our Dynasty League, AJ and I are in a Dynasty League, we made a trade. I traded him to a Tagovailoa, TJ Hawkinson, a 2026 third rounder for Zach Charbonnet, Jamison Williams, a 2026 and 2027 first rounders. So on the board, pretty solid. I mean, I'm kind of in a weird stage. Like I won the league last year. I like my team good, like enough to compete, but at the same time, like I feel like I'm like in a competitive rebuild phase where it's like I don't really. I mean, I do want to win. I don't want to say I don't want to care that I don't want to win, but like I have a couple pieces, younger pieces, and I need to provide some more depth. I've always told you that I've loved Charbonnet. Need some running back help. I literally had to start Zeke as my RB2 this week because Brian Robinson was out. I traded away Najee Harris also this week, and yeah, got Kendra Miller, which was nice, a Saint. I hold on the hope. He's what 23, 22. He's young.
He's young, but I'm sorry to break to you. There's very low chance he's gonna be an impact guy at least for a couple years.
I know. I'm playing the long game with Kendra Miller. It was just an extra piece for a certain deal. But anyways, that's some dynasty stuff. I just figured I'd bring that up. The most important thing was the Saints won and the Vikings won, although it did not look pretty, which is great. But week 10 it will be officially behind us now. We can officially move on to week 11 for our Thursday night show. But before we do that, we have 5 takeaways each, as we always do towards the end of the week, whether it's fantasy or NFL related. So go ahead and give me your first takeaway.
Yeah, like I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. I said we can give Jane Daniels the Rookie of the Year. I think we can give Lamar the MVP at this point.
Yeah.
Really good game against the Bengals. Won by 1 point there, but his numbers. I mean, 7-3 record, a completion percentage at 69.1. So I saw a good completion percentage there, almost 70%. But one of the big things is his stats from last year to this year are pretty damn close. I mean, in 10 games, he has 2,669 yards, with 24 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. Last year in 16 games, so he did miss a game, with 3,678 yards, the same amount of touchdowns at 24, but has 7 interceptions. So essentially, in 6 to 7 games, if he hits 1,000 yards, throws for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 more touchdowns, and only throws 2 more interceptions, he's going to have more touchdowns by being in the 30s. He's going to be at 3,600 plus passing yards, under 7 interceptions, which is what he had last year. And on the rushing side, 538 rushing yards, only 2 rushing touchdowns. But again, last year, 821 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. If he's able to get 1 to 2 more rushing touchdowns these next couple games, he only needs to average less than 60 rushing yards a game to get to that 800 mark, like how he did last year. I mean, he's putting up better numbers. It's more efficient, and I get it. It's probably a big thing with Derrick Henry, but why he's not getting the rushing yards or rushing touchdowns. But even then, he 24 passing touchdowns, which leads the NFL to 2 interceptions. I think it's the best ratio in the NFL at this time right now, and he's top 5, I think, in passing yards. I mean, and top 3 in rushing yards for quarterbacks. I mean, he's right up there with everything. And right now, there's no one else that's really he's in a race with at the moment. It feels like for the MVP.
Yeah, so my first takeaway from last week is just Take a little bit of a pause on Sam Darnold. All right. Sam Darnold did not have the best of games, as I mentioned earlier. And Darnold's been kind of going through this weird patch. Obviously, he started off the season good. Then he's kind of gotten into this position where he's kind of just been a little bit hit or miss. The last two games, last game, obviously, this week, 3 interceptions to 0 touchdowns. The week before that, 2 interceptions to 3 touchdowns. So he's producing good fantasy numbers because the yard totals are continuously up, as well as the touchdowns being up for the most part. But maybe just a little bit of skepticism with Sam Darnold, at least in this stage. I mean, this is a stage where a lot of quarterbacks and a lot of players, for that matter, kind of hit a wall. Jared Goff had 5 interceptions last night, and the Lions were able to win the game. So it happens, right? To the best of quarterbacks at a time. I don't know if it's still currently anymore because of it's Lamar's race to lose, but Jared Goff was considered an MVP candidate. Now he could still have the potential to do so. 5 interceptions definitely hurts that. But pause the break on Sam Darnold a little bit. On top of that, the Vikings they had their game on the road at Jacksonville. They have 2 more away games before returning home for a 3-game stand. They are at Tennessee and at Chicago. Obviously, those could be 2 trap games. Chicago and Tennessee having a little bit of rough years, but their defenses have relatively stepped up. And so if the defense steps up once again, Sam Darnold could be in trouble. On top of that, as a Vikings fan, I was a little bit concerned to see Justin Jefferson's production was really not there. I think he had 5 receptions for 40 yards. So Darnold was kind of dishing around to other receivers, which is great, but every one of his throws looked terrible. It seriously did. Even his completions, his wide receivers looked like the best receivers in football trying to catch them. So not saying press the panic button on Sam Darnold. I probably would still roster him probably as your backup quarterback unless he is your starting quarterback. The biggest thing is just take a little bit of a pause and realize that maybe this is a period of time where Darnold's going to be struggling for a little bit until he's able to kind of return home or maybe have another game to get back on his foot and in the right position. All right, your second takeaway.
That Bryce Young doesn't really deserve the hate that he's been getting. I mean, yes, he has not been the best quarterback, but he's been on the worst team at every other position group in the NFL. I mean, name another team that has a worse wide receiver room than the Carolina Panthers that he's been dealing with the last 2 years. Not offensive line, defense. They've traded away most of their defensive guys the last couple of years or let go of them before Bryce Young was there. I mean, there's just a lot wrong with the team around Bryce Young. And, he's 2-0 the last 2 weeks against my Saints and then just winning last week. He's been solid these last 2 games. He hasn't been great. 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He only has like 300 combined yards between the 2 games. So, I mean, not great there, but it's one of those things that he's winning games at the end of the day. And he's on one of the worst teams. Just all his surrounding parts aren't good. Just the hate around him, I understand it, but I also don't at the same time.
My second takeaway is just overall is the time to buy the hype on Justin Herbert. Now, I mentioned this earlier, I think it was last week, but Herbert's been kind of progressing kind of silently. I think a lot of fantasy managers are going to see that Herbert's roster percentage is really going to jump. It's currently sitting at 47.8% going into week 11. I wouldn't be surprised if that's over 55, maybe even to 60. He's had 3 really good consistent weeks, 24 points, obviously, against your Saints, then 2 points of 19 and a half. So he's done a really good job. And on top of that, the Chargers offense as a whole is rolling, right? The running game's looking good. The passing game's looking good. I'm pretty sure they're 6-3 right now. And I saw a funny stat when I was watching the Chargers game as well as the rest of the NFL games. The fact that Harbaugh is so good at basically taking a team that was terrible, at least in their standards, and flipping it around. I think they're 5-3, not 6-3. I think I'm jumping the gun a little bit. Maybe they're 6-3. I don't know. Regardless, no, they are 6-3 because they won last week and they had tied their total with 5 wins going into this week, past week. So buy the hype on Justin Herbert. He showcased his legs a little bit, which I thought was great for his game. He had 9 carries for 32 yards and a touchdown. Again, not going to blow you away with speed, but kind of gets the job done. But the biggest thing is he's been consistent. He's not one of those guys that's going to really waver as far as overall production. He holds the ball really well. I believe on the year, let me look up quick stats real quick. He only has 1 interception on the year. He's had a touchdown in every game besides week 7 against Arizona, where he still put up 15 points strictly with passing yards. So if you want a reliable option, I think Justin Herbert could be your guy, especially since this Chargers offense is really progressing. And I would maybe buy heavy on some of the Chargers players in general, such as J.K. Dobbins, Lad McConkey, to name a few. All right, your third takeaway.
Caleb Williams kind of has fell off. I think that we were expecting him to have a little bit of fall off after having that really high that he was having for I want to say 2-3 weeks, where he was looking great. I mean, he went on a stretch of 3 games with only 1 interception, 37 touchdowns, having almost 800 yards between those 3 games. These last few games, yeah, he's not turning the ball over. The last 3 games, 0 interceptions, but he also has 0 passing touchdowns. He also hasn't gone over 220 yards. He's at 131, 107, or 217, and 120. And it's not like he's not getting the pass attempts. 24, 41, and 30 pass attempts all there against not the best defensive teams either. I mean, Washington has been a solid team as a whole, but their pass defense has been bad all year. Arizona doesn't have the best pass defense, and then just facing New England last week. I mean, arguably one of the worst teams, if not, or second worst team uh, behind the Panthers right now in New England. I mean, just one of those things that the the highs have been really high for him and the lows have been really low. I mean, first 2 weeks, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Went on that little skid of good games there that I mentioned before, and then he's right back to the really low lows, having no touchdowns with no interceptions. It's not like he's giving you like tremendous rushing upside either on the season. No rushing touchdowns and only 236 rushing yards on 40 attempts through 9 games, 4-5 record. I mean, they were looking good. At one point, they were 4-2, it looks like, and now they're 0-3 in their last 3 games. I mean, this was a team that a lot of people I think were overhyping after that little win streak that they went on, and now it's looking like the old Chicago Bears. Nothing else has changed. It looks like they're right back to having a top 15, top 20 pick this year, not really being in contention for any type of playoff push, it really seems like. And it seems like the whole thing's also turned around after that Washington game, after that Hail Mary, after I forgot whoever that DB was who was talking trash to the fans before the touchdown even happened. It's really just all gone downhill since that moment.
So for my third takeaway, it's just overall the week of the kickers. I mean, we had the lowest of lows and we had the highest of highs. I mean, the lowest of lows, the guys that we typically see have success. Young Hoku, as you probably saw, probably lost the Falcons the game against the Saints because he missed 3 field goals, went 1 for 4 on the day, and they lost 20-17. He even took blame and responsibility for that. Jake Moody in his first game back from injury, 3 for 6 overall, went 1 from 3 from 40 to 49, and 0 for 1 from 50 plus. And then on the flip side, guys like John Parker Romo for my Vikings, 4 for 4 on the day. They weren't relatively hard field goals, but still won the game there. The Lions, Jake Bates, won the game there. I mean, it's one of those things with kickers in general, like you never really know, and it's okay. Like they're going to have bad days, they're going to have great days. But the biggest thing and the trend that I've seen is just like the overall stability of kickers. And I love how they moved the extra point out because 10 years ago, the extra point was a piece of cake. Now the extra point's difficult. Justin Tucker, he missed his like 7th career extra point ever against the Bengals. So there's just a lot of things about the kickers, both good and bad. But the biggest thing that I'm curious to see is how this is going to affect fantasy managers moving forward. Just because, or just like, you know, the NFL teams themselves, fantasy managers, including myself, typically have short leash on these guys. And these are guys we're consistently asking to make field goals. Is guys like Brendan Aubrey, you know, the new Justin Tucker. Can Jake Bates continue that success? You never really know, but at times when you look at your fantasy team, kickers can make or break your fantasy game. And so it's going to be curious to see kind of moving forward with those kickers. I believe obviously Moody's going to be fine. Kuz already going to be there. You know, he had a bad game. It happens. But just something interesting as I really felt like there was a discrepancy between good kickers and bad kickers last week. All right, your fourth takeaway.
I wouldn't say Rodgers is time for him to hang it up, but they need to try something new. I mean, he hasn't had the worst season overall, but like he hasn't had the season that I was expecting him to have. Yes, he does have 15 touchdowns, 7
Really?
receptions.
Dark
I
horse
mean,
MVP and it's just not hitting?
it's just not him. I mean, you think after coming off
Hey, you miss
Achilles injury,
100%
being
of the shots you don't take. I'm still holding on to that Will Levis one. So
yeah, you got your Levis one. I got Rodgers being the dark horse MVP at 41 years old. But yeah, he again not the worst, but not what we've seen, what we expect from Aaron Rodgers, especially going out and training for Devontae Adams. Just hasn't been good really much at all this year. So like I said, 15 touchdowns, 7 receptions, 2,258 yards, but owns a 3-7 record with the Jets right now. I mean, this is not where a lot of us thought the Jets would be. We thought Jets were going to be a contender. I mean, Brees Hall, he's taken a step down. Garrett Wilson's had a solid year overall, but Rodgers just hasn't hasn't been carrying the team like how I think a lot of us expected. One of the big things is if you look at outside the first three games, they started 2-1. Since then, they've had one win. They lost to Denver, Minnesota, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, New England. Won against Houston 2 weeks ago, and then just lost to Arizona. And it's not like these losses were super competitive. Yes, they only lost by one to Denver, but that was a 9-10 game. Lost by 6 to Minnesota. Lost to 3 to Buffalo, and then lost by 22, right? Yeah, 22 to Pittsburgh, lost by 3 to New England, and then just last week lost by 25 to Arizona. And those closer losses by a field goal wasn't like they were super competitive. It wasn't a back and forth game. Really good defense. It was just kind of one of those games where a lot of drives stalled out. I mean, it was all four, and I was just not able to be productive on the ground. I want to say it's time for Rodgers to hang him up. But I mean, if he doesn't have a good year next year, I don't really know what the plan is for the Jets because I believe he has one more year after this, or maybe 2 more years on that contract. So be interesting how the Jets handle this.
So my fourth takeaway overall is Russell Wilson. This is a question I should say. Is Russell Wilson a must start every week? I mean, obviously there was some question marks with Russell Wilson when they decided to start him over Justin Fields against the Jets when Russell Wilson was fully healthy, whenever that was. I thought he was fully healthy relatively throughout the entire year. So who really knows? But they started him against the Jets and quite frankly haven't really looked back. He did throw his first interception of the year. Unfortunate there last week, but still had 3 touchdowns, 195 yards, and overall was just a very productive quarterback. 24.8, 13.8, and 18.1 fantasy points. Has kind of had the highest of highs and lowest of lows, and then right in between. So you can't get much more, I guess, simplified than Russell Wilson has been. But the biggest question mark I have is, is this a guy that you can start every week moving forward? On top of that, the Steelers are going into their first division game of the season. Hard to believe that going into week 11, this is their first division game. Their next 6 games, or not next 6 games, sorry. Their next 3 games, wait, 4 games, there we go, I got it, are against division opponents. Home against Baltimore, at Cleveland, at Cincinnati, home against Cleveland. So this is going to be an important stretch for them. Obviously, for Russell Wilson, the Steelers overall is trying to win the division, even though it kind of looks like it's up in the air for that. There's a lot of question marks, especially that big matchup against Baltimore. I really think this could be a telltale sign to see if Russell Wilson's a consistent option that you should and could start every week. I really don't know. I don't have the answer for it. The only thing I've noticed is he's jumped up 18.5 points to 40.2% rostered overall, so people are kind of starting to buy the hype a little bit. Biggest question mark I have is how long can he sustain the success, and can he be a reliable option for the Steelers and your fantasy teams moving forward? Okay, your final takeaway.
Yeah, I'll stay right there with Russell Wilson, and this might answer your question. Uh, and this is more of a statement. Russell Wilson's playing at MVP level. He just won't have the counting stats to be able to contend for that MVP. He's
Fair.
3-0 up to this point. If you average out his total yards between from the 3 games if he was to play all 17 this year, he'd finish with over 4,000 yards or 4,176. He would have 34 passing touchdowns. He does have one interception there, so he would. I think it's like 5 to 6 interceptions would be like if you're just going off the averages. Obviously, it's not how that works all the time, but he's been at that level. I mean, he's like I said, again, 3-0, first 2 games, 264 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, 278 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. Last week against Washington, only 195 yards, 3 touchdowns to 1 interception. I mean, he's not the Russell Wilson that we've seen before, where he's going to be rushing a lot. He has 10 rush attempts for 13 yards and only 1 touchdown, so he's not going to give you that aspect. But just the way that he's been able to lead this team, and I get it. He has one of the best defense with them, and he hasn't been playing the best teams. Washington, they've been a solid team, but like I mentioned before, not the best defensive team. Giants, I mean, Giants are just bad in every way. And then the Jets. The Jets are very underwhelming, as I just talked about also with Aaron Rodgers. Completion percentage, not as high as you'd think for the amount of yards that he's accumulated through the first 3 games there. Uh, Only 58.8% completion percentage. If he was up to like that 65%, like where he was so far throughout his career, that's his career average 64.7. I mean, he could have about 1,000 yards, 900 yards in the first 3 games, averaging over that, maybe another touchdown or two up to this point. But he's, I would say that until he proves us wrong, or until he plays the Ravens, I think that's the only time that I would say don't have to start him. I mean, if you're in a super flex league like we are, I mean, Russell Wilson may be a good option for your second quarterback. If you have a bye, I wouldn't bat an eye on starting Russell Wilson. I mean, he hasn't proven to me that he's been bad up to this point. He's shown that he's been able to win games. He's shown that he's able to put up fantasy points up to this point. Until he proves me otherwise, I would say yes, he is a reliable fantasy option. Obviously, I wouldn't start him over like a Hurts or one of those guys, but if you're a guy who has had Dak Prescott and he's out for the year, this wouldn't be a bad option to go out and see if he's still on waivers to potentially start for this next week.
So my final takeaway is just, oh, the Cowboys. I just love to see the Cowboys suffer, not in silence, very loud. What a dismal game overall, and what a dismal quarterback play. I mean, Cooper Rush was what, 13 for 23 for 45 yards? Was he throwing like check down Charlie every play for 1 yard? I mean, you think that, okay, 45 yards, understandable. It's the 13 completion that concerns me. That's like 3 yards per throw, a little over 3 yards per throw, or close to four, whatever it is. It's ridiculous. I mean, I really didn't watch much of the game just because I didn't really feel there was a point. I figured they were going to get obliterated, and they did. And then Trey Lance came in, and I had some hopes. I mean, I forgot how fast Trey Lance truly was. And I saw a funny thing on, I don't know what it was, but I saw a funny thing is Trey Lance the next Taysom Hill, where they just utilize him as a running whatever. Now, I don't think he's got the versatility of Taysom Hill, don't get me wrong, but he's fast, man. He could run around. The only thing is he can't throw. And you'd hope by now that he can figure out how to throw because he's got all the tools he needs. I mean, any running quarterback's got all the tools they need. Can't seem to figure out why a coach can't figure out how to teach him to throw. Just put him with the Vikings. Give him to Josh McCown. Let him develop him. I would be fine with that. I would. But no, in all seriousness, the Cowboys have a lot of questions. Your fantasy teams have a lot of questions because not only are these quarterbacks sucking, the whole entire offense is sucking. It's the same thing that happened with Tua and Tyreek Hill, Tua and Jalen Waddle. Like CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, they have nowhere to throw them the ball to. And if they do, it's dink and dunk yards. I mean, I think they had like 60 passing yards yesterday, something like that. That can't really equate to much fantasy value unless you're at like 10 receptions for 20 yards. So there's a lot of cause for concern. The biggest thing is moving forward, what do the Cowboys do? Do they go to Trey Lance? I think that's probably the most likely thing. I mean, what does Mike McCarthy care? He's going to get fired anyways if he doesn't get fired by the end of the season, maybe even next week. There's just a lot of things. But if you have a Cowboy player and the trade deadline is still not passed yet, I would maybe consider moving them just so you can have a safe and secure, maybe couple studs overall. But if you're holding on to the players, just know that there's a risk associated with that. But sometimes risk is a good thing. I just want to throw that out there that, man, that was hard to watch for the quarterbacks and the rest of the Cowboys as a whole. Thank
Yeah,
you
for
guys for listening
Hexon,
to another episode. Oh, go on. Sorry.
sorry, I was gonna say about the just check downs. CD stats, he had 6 receptions on 7 pass attempts to him for only 21 yards. He's averaging
Yeah.
3.5 yards per reception. And Ferguson had 4 receptions for 24 yards. I mean, Rico Dowdle was the leading fantasy guy with 53 rushing yards and 3 receptions for 3 yards. I mean, when that's the case in an NFL game when your leading guy is getting you what 8 points, if that's your leading fantasy option, there's something wrong with that offense.
Especially with the talent of the guys that are on the Cowboys. I mean, it's not like you got like dink or dunk like Titans receivers other than Calvin Ridley. I mean, these are top tier guys, and it's just the same thing with Tyreek and Tua. And it really begs the question. I don't understand it. I really don't. I mean, these are NFL quarterbacks, right? Like, there's no way that there's not another good quarterback than the starting quarterback
Yeah.
on an NFL roster. If there is, I don't. I mean, there's so much good talent. It just boggles my mind. And like, I think there's a notion to keep with these guys, or if they've been with them for a period of time, understand that. But like, practice is different than the game. You could be the best practice player ever. You get in the game, you get nervous, you just check it down. It's just, I don't know. And that's why they always say the backup quarterback's the best position in football, because if you have a good backup quarterback, you don't have to worry about the production falling away from the other guys. And who knows? I mean, I really don't, but I really think with how quarterbacks are valued in the draft, how quarterbacks are valued in free agency, that teams can have at least three, at least two good quarterbacks. I understand if you're under third stringer, it's different, but I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that in the entire NFL, there's not 64 good quarterbacks that you can consistently throw in there to trust. I'm not saying give me a Tom Brady and a Patrick Mahomes on the same team. I'm saying give me a Patrick Mahomes and give me a Derek Carr, right? Like just somebody that can do enough to like propel. But maybe if there was a Derek Carr or a Sam Darnold, then there wouldn't be backup quarterbacks, or the quarterbacks that are starting on about 5, 6 teams would not be playing to begin with. But It's just a question that I'll never probably be able to answer until hopefully 5 years down the line, people can figure it out.
Yeah, I thought it
Thank
was
you
also
guys.
funny.
Oh, no,
I
keep
also thought it
going.
was funny.
I'm trying to end
CD
this. Keep
Lamb.
going.
You see what CD said about one of the touchdowns that he like basically dropped or whatever that would have
What do you
given more
say?
fantasy points. You know how the stadium's built for the Cowboys, like how the sun shines through, like when it gets later in
Right?
the day. Apparently, it was during that time of the game, and he just didn't see the ball. He was running a crossing route, ball thrown right to him, and he just didn't see it. And I guess Jerry Jones came out today and be like, "What do you want us to do? Rebuild the stadium? Build a whole new
Yeah,
stadium
right.
for
Tear it
you?"
down.
Like, yeah, it's like I get it. Maybe yeah, the sun was in your eyes, but like I just don't understand how Jerry Jones. I think it also comes from the top right now with the Cowboys with Jerry
Oh,
Jones. I mean,
absolutely.
you got to back your player. Like, oh yeah, maybe he didn't see the ball because of the sun. Like, you don't go out and say, oh, should I build a new stadium for you to be able to
Well,
see the
and here's the
ball?
thing with Jerry Jones. He's not. This is not the first time Jerry Jones has done something like this. With CeeDee Lamb in general, when he had asked for a new contract, he was basically saying like, "Yeah, he doesn't deserve that." Like just saying like the fact that like it's like Jerry Jones is like not. He's oblivious to the fact that the Cowboys are the most popular franchise in football and probably all of sports. And obviously, there's I don't know millions and millions of supporters of the Cowboys, and everything is putting the blame on you. Yeah, coaching is not great. You guys got Mike Zimmer as your DC. You got Mike McCarthy as your head coach. You got guys that you just paid massive amounts of money to. You got a good defensive players, but like it's not working itself out. I'm glad I'm not a Cowboys fan, but there's a lot of people that are Cowboys fans, and it seems like people can shy away from the fact that the Saints are 3-7, but they can't shy away from the fact that the Cowboys are 3-6 because the Cowboys are the Cowboys. It'd be the same thing if it was the Chiefs. It'd be the same thing if it was, other good teams like that. But who knows? I mean, Jerry's really got to figure it out, and I don't know, man. He just needs to see what's going to happen because right now it's not looking very good. Am I clear to end this now?
Yeah, I guess.
Thank you guys for listening to another episode of The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter at The Truth as one to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy levels, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp to focus and memory? Look no further than Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports, AZ, and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity, while also maintaining an ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.